Welcome to the Flexible Curricula channel, your one-stop for anything education with your host, Nate Berman. Though we normally consult for schools and districts, we also strive to help parents who really want to be in the know for their kids' education. If you like what you see, please give a thumbs up and leave a comment. If you want to see more of our videos when they are released, hit that subscribe button. This video really gives a look into the subjectivity of grades and grading. Have you ever gotten a paper back or a test and felt that you deserved a higher score? For any teachers out there, have you ever had a hard time grading a paper and deciding between two different grades? How are grades decided, and is there a way to eliminate the subjectivity? Stay tuned to get these answers and more. So there are really two parts to grading. The first one is designing the assessments, and the second one is how they're scored. Now, with dealing with these two types of things, we're going to go into both of these in order to have a better understanding. The first one is designing assessments. Now, there are two parts to that. One is the scope, meaning what is actually going to be covered for this assessment or test. And the second thing is, how are you going to be tested? What is it going to do? What form is it going to be? What is actually expected of the student? Now, within the scope, we're going to have a couple issues. First, the question is, what level of material is being assessed and to what degree? Now, for this, is it just a basic material, or do you have to have deeper understanding? How broad and how deep is the material being covered? That's something that has to be understood for the scope. Another question is, what level of material is really expected based on a positive outcome? Now, this is an issue that doesn't always match up to what the assessment actually pans out to be. And this is where students have a lot of frustration, and sometimes teachers have frustration too when it is a standardized test that they have to work towards. So where the scope is subjective, first, the issue is choosing what material within the unit is important and what is not important. What do you emphasize? What do you de-emphasize? Every teacher has their own prejudices. Every school or district might have their own prejudices on what they feel as giving extra weight to, extra credence, and what's not. That's why you could have a test where the bulk of a test happens to be on one or two topics on the unit, and some you barely have any questions on, and you wonder what's going on because you've prepared well for those, but these other topics that are really heavily emphasized, you weren't prepared for the depth of questions that they were going to give you on this test. It makes it very difficult. And the other issue is it's not clear from the beginning, meaning you could be asking yourself, I didn't think this was going to be on the test. I'm sure every one of us has had some point in our life where we've had that comment because the assessment didn't pan out to what we thought it was going to be. And this is where a lack of communication and clarity for objectivity comes in, and the test or assessment becomes very subjective. A case in point, the AP chemistry conundrum, as I like to call it. The goal of the exam is ideally to test out of one, if not two semesters of freshman chemistry. Your basic chemistry in university, many people take this assessment hoping to be able to get out and not have to take these courses or take honors courses, ideally at some of the elite universities, but ideally to place out, especially with the cost of college tuition today. Now, scoring a 5 out of 5 on this exam can be achieved with a mere mastery of only 35% of freshman chemistry. So 2 semesters of freshman chemistry, you only know 35% of the material, and you get a 5, you get an A. How is this fair? Well, it's based on what is weighted and focused on and emphasized for this test. If you know the right topics, those 35%, you'll get a 5 out of 5. If not, you might get a lower score. But does that mean you really know freshman chemistry? Well, as a result, a growing number of universities do not accept the AP chemistry exam. And we're not talking only the most elite, like Harvard or MIT. Still first tier and second tier schools are doing away with accepting AP chemistry credit because of this situation and this lack of mastery with only 35%. That doesn't show that you know it. I had a pleasant conversation with the award-winning lecturer from Boston University who has been vehemently against accepting the AP exam based on this situation. Now, assessment and archetype. The first are the three main types that many students and many teachers are aware of. The first one is the diagnostic pre-assessment, otherwise known as your pre-test. Figuring out what students know, so this way you can move forward with the material and what to cover and what needs less coverage and what gaps have to be filled in for lack of background information. The next one is your formative assessment. This is kind of the checking for understanding as you're going along. Teachers do this sometimes informally, sometimes formally, but this is a way to see are students getting it as they're going through the unit. And then the last one is summative assessment. That's your end test and say, okay, did you get it or not? That's basic stuff, but there are many other types of assessments out there. The next one is confirmative assessment. That's dealing with, do you remember it, not just now, but a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, how are you dealing on that? And then other assessments, norm reference assessments, these are dealing with like your standardized test where, okay, what rank are you compared to everyone else? Oh, I made it to the 78th percentile. That means I'm better than 78% of the students who took this. Well, is that really what we want to compare to? Or is there something that is less subjective as a way to do it? Then there's the ipsative assessment, which is theoretically nice because it shows how are you progressing as an individual, but it doesn't necessarily give a finish line. What means that you've made the objective? Oh, I'm getting better, but how much more do I have to improve? Or how close am I to actually really knowing it? Now, here's the last one is one that I feel really is something that's important for all teachers, students, and schools to be aware of. That's the criterion reference assessment. Now, this measures students' performance to preset objectives. So it's very clear, this is what you have to achieve, this is what you need to do, and that means you've passed. Now, does that mean you can't have clear objectives with other forms of assessment? No, but this one, by definition, is objectives-based, and that makes everything a lot easier and clearer to move forward. Now, the traditional methods of assessment, some have benefits, so everyone has a benefit, but the question is everyone benefiting the student? Some are more beneficial to the teacher, some are more beneficial to the district, some are more beneficial to the state. Depends on who is giving the assessment and who is actually funding and paying for it. So for example, your basic standard summative assessment would be like a multiple choice test. There, every right question has a right answer already given. Is it A, B, C, D, or maybe E? But it's there. The next one, a true-false test. That would be a 50-50 shot of getting the right question. Getting the question right. Does that mean that you know it? Maybe, maybe not. Also, fill in the blank. This has limitations also. I'm going to go through with these in more detail in a moment. And then the next one, essay or show your work type of test. It gives a fuller picture of student mastery, but still this also could be filled with problems of really showing that it doesn't really translate to student mastery or not. So let's take it one at a time and see how it goes. So the first one, multiple choice test. This is your standardized test format. Why do they do it? Because it's cheap and easy to grade. Whether it's doing a Scantron or just quickly eyeballing it to actually check it off, it's very cheap and efficient to actually get through thousands and thousands of tests in very little time. So the ones who design these tests aren't looking for, do the students really know it, but what's the quickest and cheapest way to get through? Is that kind of sad? Yes. Is it a little frustrating being the one who has to take it, or the one who is a parent who is funding this, or a school or district that's funding it for their students? Yes, incredibly frustrating, but this is the reality that they have set up with the construct of this type of test. Now, also, there are certain tells that give answer to different choices. A lot of times, like for example, the SAT, there are people that actually are SAT coaches, and I've seen how they've gone through where they teach students, not necessarily to know what the right answer is or to know the material, but how to take the test, to know the keys that and tells that they're giving. So this way you can get it down to one, at most two answers for every question. So you have close to a 75% chance using their tells of getting the right answer. Does that mean you know any of the material? No. Does that mean you know the vocabulary? No. Know the math? No. But you know how to take the test and you can do well accordingly, disproportionate to where you should be otherwise. Is this a disadvantage to those who know the material but aren't prepared for the test or don't know the tells? Yes. And this is something that I feel is a big issue of inequity with test taking of this format. The next one, the true false test. One, it's a 50-50 shot, but there are also keywords that you can also key in on, no, not to be repetitively redundant, which you can see never and always. Those serve as tells, and other words such as the sometimes and other vague terms of this nature or declarative terms of it like a never or always will give you an information of, okay, is it that, or have you heard of an exception in order to figure out otherwise? A lot of times the never and always tend to be false, but it depends on the one who's designing the test on whether that is actually holding true. Now, the next one is fill in the blank short answer. Now, this gives a little bit more of student recall because you have a blank. It's not, unless you have a word bank that actually works to fill in the blanks, you're pulling this all from your head. So, but the limitation is, it's really straight regurgitation of the material. It doesn't deal with higher level thinking to really show that one student masters it. Although quick and easy to check, not so beneficial to really assessing student mastery. Now, the next one is essay or showing work type of assessments. Now, this does give a much more comprehensive view of student mastery, but there are certain limitations based on that. One, students have to have a clear understanding of the objectives. What is expected ahead of time before this assignment has been turned in or assigned for actual work at the beginning of the assignment for an essay or beginning of a test, what is expected to actually show that you've met the objectives. If that is not clear, then the students are at a disadvantage because then they're reaching for this nebulous goal of completion without having clear set tasks. Rubrics work very well, but even rubrics, depending, unless they're very well constructed, can have the same disadvantage with setting up a student for being in a position to have difficulty and potentially a lower score than they would otherwise get. And the other issue is that it's too cookie cutter, meaning you have to put this chunk here, then this chunk here, then this chunk here, and that really destroys mastery. I can give a case in point of my own personal learning, and this took place when I was in undergrad in chemistry, in a chemistry course, where the professor required students to format their test in a specific way for calculating certain problems. I had learned it a different way and was working through the problems effectively. Although I was doing A work and getting the problems routinely correct, I would be getting grades of, instead of an A, a C on the test because I wasn't showing the work in the formatting that the professor wanted. The TA happened to be very kind to me because he saw that I was knowledgeable as I was helping out students in the lab of my section with their labs and having a clear understanding of the material. And he asked, how come I'm doing so poorly on tests? My translation, fortunate for me, I said, I need a translator to understand what the professor wants. And he said, don't worry about it, you got your A. Fortunately, I had the TA that knew, had shown from other means my mastery of the material to show that I knew what I did. But most students are not so lucky, and as a result, suffer the indignity of a lower score or in lower grade, not because they don't know how to do it, but because of being too rigid and too cookie cutter with an expectation for completion of work. Now, that covers the material on it and how to take it, what's on the test. But the other half is the scoring component. So, as we had said on the initial intro, Are grades grades honest? Well, not really. But why? Why aren't they honest? What's the limitation that makes grades dishonest? Well, first of all, you have the concept of scaling or curving grades. Now, this happens all the time in universities. And can it be helpful? Yes, but usually results in a much different result that the assessment doesn't match what realistic objectives would give. So here's a question that I can pose to you and see if you say yes to either one of these questions, then you would find curving grades something that is a problem. One, is it okay for everyone to get an A? Everyone had clearly mastered the material, even at a high level. Do they get an A, or should it be curved? In which case, then some students should end up getting a lower grade, even though they all showed on their assessment, on their test, they did well. The other one is it okay for everyone to get an F? And that is something that makes it very difficult. I know a case in point where a very challenging course of anatomy and physiology at the university I attended, where the median score of the assessments was set to reach students at 39%. 39% was your C. If you got a 41% on a test, you had an A in the class. If you had a 40%, a B, and 38% a D. Now, does that mean, is that realistic to say you got a 40% on a test and you got a B and 39% a C? How does that pan out? Well, if you think everyone should have just got an F because they all got below 50%, then that would be realistic objectives. But if they're not realistic objectives, then curving grades might be necessary because the grades are all low, or if the grades are all high. So you can see how there are some challenges with curving, and sometimes curving is detrimental to students, and sometimes they'll move it to the advantage of students, but it doesn't really match with realistic objectives, and that's where the subjectivity comes in. Now, here's the scoring conundrum. Let me give you an example. If you get 85 correct and miss 2 questions from a 100-question time test, what grade do you think you should get, and why? If you want, pause the video now, take a moment to think for what answer you want, and then come right back. So here's a situation. So let's say you scored 85 correct and you missed 2 questions. Well, what was the situation? Did you answer all 100 questions or not? Let's say you answered only 87 questions. Then you would have had 85 out of 87 correct, which is roughly 98%. That would be an A if you average it out. 98%, according to just about every grading scale, is an A. But what if you said, oh, it's 85, but you were supposed to get all 100? Is it 85%? Then it's only a B, because most grading scales have 85% as a B. Now, is there an objectively correct grade in this? Which one is correct? Which one is not correct? Do you see the validity of both getting an A, a score of an A, or score of a B? Let's try it another way. What if there was that same test of 100 questions where a student got 85 correct, but the student only answered 85 questions? Or the student answered all 100 questions. If a student only answered 85 questions, then they got 85 out of 85 correct. But there was 100 questions on the test. Now, if the student answered all 100 questions, then they got 15 wrong. But the first way, the student got 100% of the questions answered correctly. So should the grade be the same for these two situations or different? And let's ask, should it be the same or different objectively, not subjectively? Not, well, I feel, but is there merit in saying that one is correct or the other? And why? Is there a way to make this assessment objective? Well, there is, but in order to do that, you need to have the type of assessment and how it is formatted can make a big difference. So to make sure that assessments are done correctly, you need to make sure that a format matches the student's needs in order to be able to facilitate demonstration of mastery of what clearly objectively defined goals need to be met. That is that's the biggest difference in being able to have a student succeed and fail on a test. And the next one is the way it's scored can vary greatly as well. And in terms of this last example with our 85 question correct on the test, are you basing it in terms of concept mastery? If a student scored 85 out of 85 on a test and it was all similar problems, then clearly they know how to do it. If the objective was, can they complete 100 problems in a set amount of time, then your objective is very different. So it's dependent on what the objective is. But if it's not a clearly stated objective, then you have subjectivity. But in one case, 85 out of 85 shows you really know how to do the problems. You might work a little slower than the teacher had asked, but you still know how to do the problems very well and very comfortably to get 85 correct. If you only do 85 out of 100 and you got 85 correct and 115 wrong, it might be paused to say, okay, you're doing pretty well, but you're not maybe at full mastery yet. You've got the objective, you understand it, but you're not there to fully master it. So it's a question, and this is where clear objectives help very much so. And so the way it's scored can vary based on this, because teachers aren't always clear on what the objectives are. Schools and districts aren't always clear on what their curricular objectives are, which make it difficult for teachers at times. And states, for their assessments, are not always clear and spelled out what their objectives are, which make things very nebulous and very difficult for schools to implement effectively what they need to do for success for their students. Now, these objectives need to be spelled out ahead of time by teachers in terms of how they, before they present this assessment, for schools and districts by having a curricula and having curriculum that actually dictate what that is. And this is how you can avoid ambiguity and result in better outcomes. So thank you for watching the Flexible Curricula channel. Once again, if you'd like to see what if you like what you see, please give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. I'd love to hear about your grading nightmare stories, so please leave that comment below. Also, I'd love to hear if you had, as a teacher, had nightmares in terms of figuring out grades for students and how to assess. I'd love to hear those comments as well. So please tell me about those. If you want to see more of our videos when they're released, hit that subscribe button. Please feel free to contact me at nateb@flexiblecurricula.com if your school or district would like some guidance in growing your students towards academic excellence. Thank you.